I've had this iPad Pro for 6 months now, and it's hands down my favorite device. And that's saying a lot coming from a lifelong Windows, Linux, and Android user. But just because the iPad is a great product doesn't mean it's going to help you get things done. Will an iPad Pro actually make you more productive? Let's find out. Hi, I'm James, an engineer and a productivity coach from Seattle, Washington. On this channel, I help people like you become more productive without turning into a robot. 6 months ago, I bought a 12.9-inch iPad Pro with the keyboard and the pencil and all the jazz. My purchase decision was pretty much on a whim. I'm still using it every day, but is it actually making me more productive? I'm guessing you're here because you're thinking of getting an iPad for productivity purposes. Maybe you want to take notes for school or for an online course. Maybe you want to incorporate some visual spatial thinking into your workflow. Or maybe you just need a separate device that's focused on getting you organized. The iPad Pro can certainly do all of these things. But is it worth the cost? When we're thinking about adding a new tool to our toolbox, we need to watch out for the any benefit mindset. In Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, he explains the way that most of us make decisions about new tools. He calls this the any benefit mindset. And the any benefit mindset says this: you're justified in using a tool if you can identify any possible benefit to its use or anything you might possibly miss out on if you don't use it. And to be honest, this is the approach I took when I bought the iPad Pro. I thought, yes, I can edit videos on the couch. It'll be great. The problem with this type of thinking is that it totally ignores all the negatives that come alongside the tool. As we'll see later, editing videos on the couch is fun, but I'm actually more productive editing videos on my PC. And if you look at the all-in cost of an iPad Pro and the Magic Keyboard and the pencil, I could have paid an editor to edit all my videos, and I could have sat on the couch and watched Netflix instead. Fortunately, there's a better way to think about adding new tools to our toolbox. And this is what Cal Newport calls the craftsman approach. The craftsman approach says this: identify the core factors that determine success in your professional life. Adopt a tool only if its positive impacts on these factors substantially outweigh its negative impacts. This is just a fancy way to say, examine the ROI on any tool that you add to your toolbox. So if we're thinking about adding an iPad Pro to our productivity workflows, we need to think about the core factors that go into productivity. Now, these core factors can change depending on what type of work you do, but as a knowledge worker, I like to think about 3 core factors. These are input, thinking, and output. Input is what kind of ideas are you being shown, and can you process that information and retain it efficiently? Thinking is the tools, techniques, and workflows we use to improve the way we interact and shape the input that we're receiving. And output, of course, is anything that we produce. Is the quality of the work we're producing getting better? Is the quantity of the work we're producing going up? With a physical device like the iPad, we also want to take a look at 3 additional factors: focus, usability, and portability. For focus, does the tool encourage distraction or traction? For usability, is this an object that I want to pick up and interact with and use every day? And portability, of course, can I take this to a different context outside of my office and use it to be productive? So I'm going to talk about these 6 factors, how they relate to the iPad Pro, and as we go along, I'll score them on the spider chart. Let's take a look at these and see if the iPad is worth the trade-off or not. For input, the iPad is hands down become my favorite device for reading articles, reading books, and even studying lectures online. Highlighting in Instapaper, in Matter, or in the Kindle app is just a joy to do with the Apple Pencil. All of my highlights get synced to Readwise, and I don't have to worry about my notes getting lost. I don't think I'll ever use my Kindle again, just because of how clunky it is to highlight things. Another thing that the iPad Pro has done for my input is rekindle my love of sketchnoting. Sketchnoting is a technique for taking notes during a lecture, where not only are you writing down words, but you're also sketching ideas as you go. Now, I like the idea of sketchnoting, but my skills as an artist are not that great, and what I found was anytime I sketchnoted on paper, I would make mistakes, I would mess up a drawing, and I would just hate the process of not being able to go back and fix things right on the spot. One nice thing about an iPad is if I make a mistake, I can just hit undo, I can do it again. If I put a sketch or some text in an awkward spot, I can highlight it and move it to a different spot. It makes the process of sketchnoting much nicer. The end result is that I pay more attention in class, and afterwards I get this beautiful, well, if you look at my drawings, maybe they're not so beautiful, but I get this nice to look at set of notes that I took in class. It's amazing how much the addition of an undo feature has rekindled my love for sketchnoting. My only complaint with the iPad Pro for the input side of things is the size of it. It can be really awkward to hold this thing. The iPad Pro is light, but The size of it is just awkward enough for my hands that extended reading times can get kind of weird. The 11-inch is nicer to hold, of course, but then on the Magic Keyboard, you're limited to a smaller, reduced size keyboard. If you don't plan on typing a lot, then I would recommend going with the 11-inch. For me, I would rather have the full-size keyboard. For input, I give the iPad Pro a 4.5 out of 5. Let's talk about our next category, which is thinking tools. The iPad Pro is great for drawing diagrams, mind maps, different forms of visual spatial thinking. It's really a joy to use. Sometimes for my engineering job, I'll draw sketches on the iPad first before bringing it into a more fancy CAD program. Again, because of the undo feature, the ability to change colors, and the ability to select things and drag things around, drawing on the iPad is so much nicer than drawing on a piece of paper. I've been using mind maps to outline my blog posts, to outline the scripts of these videos, and I'm finding that it's easier for me to come up with a rough flow before I go in and start writing. Writing with the Apple Pencil is nice, and it even has a feature where you can handwrite things and it'll convert it to text if you're writing in a text box. I'll get to this in the focus section, but having one dedicated screen just with an app is wonderful for drafting. Because of the way iPad apps are designed, you're less likely to want to switch to a different tab or switch to a different window or check Slack. The iPad Pro has sort of become my go-to tool for outlining articles, for thinking about different ideas, or just getting stuff out of my head. For thinking, I'm also going to give the iPad Pro a 4.5 out of 5. Let's move on to output. Output is where the iPad Pro starts to falter compared to a dedicated laptop or PC. I do find myself using it to make diagrams, whereas before I probably would have just not included a diagram. But for doing final touches on writing articles or writing YouTube scripts, it's just not as nice as a dedicated computer with a larger screen. I have used the iPad as sort of a whiteboard during Zoom calls. If you're anything like me and you're trying to juggle 5 balls, these things can all fall on you, right? Not cool. Which is a fun gimmick, but it's not really needed. Another big factor in output is task management and project management. And here the iPad is pretty good. The iPad version of Todoist works really well, but if you're a Mac dedicated only user, I would recommend using Things, which is just the most beautiful task management app I've ever seen. Project management is where things start to get a little hairy, at least for me. I use Notion for most of my personal project management, and the Notion app on iPad is just not that great. Even though I have the 12.9-inch screen with a lot of screen real estate, Notion still puts anything mobile into this single column view, which is very hampered. For example, if I try to use the calendar view on my iPad, I get this hampered view where there's only these little dots instead of the actual item. This makes project management on my iPad kind of crappy. In general, if an app has an iPad dedicated version, it's great. But there's a lot of apps where this just isn't the case yet. But the iPad does have a lot of really amazing apps dedicated just for its use. Procreate is a drawing app that's just a joy to use, and from my understanding, artists love it too. Notability is great for watching lectures and taking sketch notes. It has amazing features like undo, move things around, change colors. You can even record the lecture audio alongside your notes. Concepts has become sort of my favorite tool for diagramming. It's got infinite zoom in and infinite zoom out, layers, lots of colors, many different options for grids and measuring. It's a really great tool for diagram and visual spatial thinking. Another place where the iPad falls flat is file management. Although they've added a proper file system, there's still some things about it that are a little wonky or don't always work, and dealing with workarounds like this just isn't worth the switch to an iPad for me. Even Christopher Lawley, who is someone who loves the iPad so much that he's made it his main and only computer for years now, I think, admits that the file management on the iPad is not good enough, and he has to use a Mac to manage his file backups.
I'm not super thrilled about the iPad's backup strategy, so I like to have an extra computer here so I can dump that footage on it.
If you're someone who doesn't deal with terabytes of data, this is not a problem, but as someone who does, it severely limits the amount of output that I feel comfortable doing on my iPad. There's a few other things that hold me back from using the iPad as an output device, namely command line apps like the one I use to run my blog, and the lack of true external monitor support. You can use a larger monitor, but you get stuck with the same aspect ratio, and it only duplicates the screen instead of extending it. One of my silly thoughts when I bought the iPad on a whim was that, oh, I can do video editing on this iPad. iPad. I thought this would enable me to sit on the couch or elsewhere in the house to edit videos, and while I can do that with LumaFusion, there are a few things that hold me back from actually doing this. One is that I'm just way faster on a computer with proper keyboard shortcuts than I am using my Apple Pencil or even the Magic Keyboard. While it's amazing that I can even edit 4K video on a device this small, that doesn't mean it's actually faster than my PC. One big blocker for me is that you can't really run background apps on the iPad. This means that anytime I want to export a video from LumaFusion, I have to wait for the whole thing to render and export before I can do anything else, otherwise it fails. There are similar issues with uploading, file management, things like this that kind of lock up your iPad until the thing is done. For these reasons, I'm giving output on the iPad a 3 out of 5. You could definitely do it, but I think there are better tools out there. Our next consideration is focus. Does an iPad help me focus? Well, it could or it could not. If you set up the iPad like I have, where I have no notifications, and this is primarily a productivity device, then yes, the iPad can be great for focus. There's something about the way apps are structured in that they take up the whole screen and everything else goes away that makes it very easy to focus. I love drafting articles on the iPad because it's really hard for me to get distracted from the task at hand. My PC has 2 screens and I'm always wanting to switch to Slack or switch to Twitter or switch to check out my Spotify or whatever instead of working on the task at hand. Narrowing down to one screen makes the job of drafting much easier. Now, you still could do things like switch to Twitter or switch to YouTube on your iPad, so it's not the perfect focus device, but I'm still gonna give it a 4 out of 5. As far as usability, the iPad is amazing. It's just a joy to use. This sounds kind of crazy coming from someone who's not an Apple fanboy, who has always used things like Linux and PC and Android, but they really nailed the design of the iPad. It's something I want to pick up and use. I want to grab the pencil and sketch or scroll around. I want to open up the Magic Keyboard and type on it because it's just so nice. When apps are designed for the iPad, they're just super fun to use, really intuitive. If you can't tell, I'm kind of a fanboy of the iPad. Adding the tactility of touch and the pencil adds a layer of something more exciting than just using your plain old mouse and keyboard. For usability, I give the iPad Pro a 4.5 out of 5. As for portability, well, it's basically a laptop. It's great. I can take it anywhere, and the battery life is insane. I can surf the web, watch videos, play games all day, and still come home with like 80% of battery left. Probably my biggest problem is that I forget to charge the iPad at all because it lasts so long. So on the portability front, I give it a 4.5 out of 5. So, will the iPad Pro make you more productive? Do the positive benefits outweigh any of the negative costs? Let's take a look at how the iPad Pro stacks up to the competition. Here's that spider chart again. And here it is versus paper. Paper wins on the focus and portability fronts, but loses everywhere else. Having undo and the ability to move things around after you've drawn them is such a lifesaver for people like me who can't draw. Versus a PC, the iPad wins hands down except for the output category. Here the benefit of a stronger processor, better file management, and the ability to have multiple screens makes PCs kind of a better choice for output. And versus the laptop, again, I prefer the iPad over a laptop for almost everything except for output. When I need better file management or command line programs, then the laptop is gonna win. So for me, the benefits that the iPad brings my productivity system totally outweigh the cost of the iPad and the cost of switching between devices. The iPad Pro won't replace all of my other computing devices, but what it does do is it adds something unique to my productivity system. Reading and highlighting articles is just a joy. Previously, I'd use my phone or my Kindle and it was always kind of clunky. I found myself getting through and highlighting more articles, Substacks, books, whatever. Being able to use touch and the pencil on a computing device adds an extra layer of tactility that you can't get on a PC. And the form factor of the iPad makes me want to pick it up and start drafting an article. I love the sense of focus it brings me. So great, I've just spent like 8 minutes justifying the purchase for myself, but will the iPad Pro make you more productive? First of all, you should not buy the iPad Pro if you can't afford it. This is an expensive device. There are tools that are much cheaper that get the job done almost as well. Second, I don't think you should get the iPad Pro if you're not someone who takes notes on books, who takes notes on articles, or who does this sort of like sense-making knowledge work thing that a lot of my viewers like to do. Additionally, I don't think you should get the iPad Pro if writing or drawing or making diagrams is not a big part of your output. If you just want a device for browsing social media or binge watching all of my YouTube videos, I'd recommend not getting a Pro and getting one of the cheaper options instead. Now, I do think an iPad Pro can add to your productivity if you're going to use it as a solely dedicated productivity device. If you're like me and you really appreciate the bigger screen size for drawing and highlighting and these sorts of things, get the Pro with the 12.9-inch version. The extra screen real estate is worth the extra money. If you think you're going to be okay with the smaller keyboard and the easier to hold size, then I would go for the 11-inch iPad Air. It's a cheaper choice and it's just as powerful as the 2020 Pro. I think you should get an iPad Pro if you've always wanted to try adding this sort of visual spatial thinking to your workflow, but have never found paper or something that you could really work into what you're doing. If you find the form factor and the UI of the iPad Pro appealing, then you should definitely take a closer look. If you've been looking at an iPad Pro, hopefully this video helped inform your buying decision. Are you thinking about getting an iPad? Do you already use one? Have you found it beneficial for your productivity system? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, check out my other gear videos, or check out this video that the YouTube algorithm handpicked just for you. See you next time.